Welcome to Wellness Wednesdays with Sam, the Miracle Man. You'll join a captivating and transformational podcast where we'll explore the extraordinary journey of Sam, a man who overcame all odds to reclaim his life and health. Each Wednesday, Sam shares his inspiring stories of growth, health, and his journey to find wellness through self-care, mental well-being, and physical rejuvenation. We'll also have dynamic and interesting interviews with professionals in health, fitness, spirituality, and personal growth to help you on your journey to uncover the true secrets to living your best life. With just a click, you can subscribe. We will welcome you every week. Now here's your amazing host, Sam.
Hey, Miracle Makers. Welcome back to Wellness Wednesdays. I'm your host, Sam the Miracle Man. So I hope you're feeling good and enjoying life. Both are critical pieces to create that life of your desires, is by feeling good and enjoying life. So let's dive into today's episode with Mike Martin, who used his outdoor skills, being in nature, to reclaim his power, to reclaim his well-being. He'll share his story and how he helps other individuals claim their well-being. All right, let's jump into this week's episode. Mike, how did you get here? What's your story? What's your journey so far?
Well, Sam, I have become kind of this author, podcaster, guided meditation backwoods philosopher over the last few years. And I guess one of the best ways to sum up exactly how I've gotten here is when you fall into your place in the world, as Bearhart put it, you never really intend to go there. You just end up. And when that happens, it becomes just this amazing journey. But for me, the backstory and the struggle, the adversity that got me there was dealing with really a lifelong battle with depression and anxiety, causing a lot of, I guess, bad choices in life and walking a lot of trails that took my compass haywire. Ultimately, I walked through 2 divorces, the second one kind of culminating off of that feeling of being a failure, walking out of the first one, leading me to a relationship that was where I ended up on the receiving end of 10 years of emotional abuse. Ultimately left homeless and, completely broken. The last thing that was said to me at the end of that was, "You got nothing to offer me, your kids, or the world." I took that to heart, ended up back in the woods at night, tried to take my own life. I woke up the next morning, and this is where it gets interesting because I went about life like it was just any other day. Didn't even dawn on me, didn't care that, I was walking this terminal thing trying to take myself out. And I turned down a podcast that I listened to religiously. It was because I'm an avid sportsman, it was a hunting based podcast. And the guest that day just happened to be the Stoic philosopher and writer Ryan Holiday, who threw all these things at me that I had never thought about. But the most important one being what adversity really truly is, which, quote Marcus Aurelius, adversity is an opportunity to showcase who you truly are inside. And I thought about it. It smacked me in the face. I was like, man, if I would have died that night, that's what my kids would have been left with, that I was a failure. I had nothing to offer. However, if I climbed back up, I learned to tame the depression, learned to battle the anxiety back, and then I rebuilt my life. Man, I'm showing my kids that if you hit that rock bottom spot, you can rebuild and you can rebuild and be so much more. And that's led me to discover this new way of viewing the outdoors because the outdoors is my safe place. And through those skills, I had never thought about how they apply to the concrete world. We get so caught up in the story of self-suffering and the depression and whatever the stresses are in the world that we forget about things. We don't look outside the box. When you're out in the wilderness on a long hunt, long hike, whatever the case is, you got to rely on yourself. And when
Mm.
I took, that skill set and I mixed it in with some philosophy and some meditation, it unlocked new doors and it turned my compass north. And I found my way to where I am today.
So basically, you already had some outdoor skills, but you didn't know how to apply them to your adversity to get over the anxiety, the depression. Is that so? What kind of like outdoor skills did you find very helpful in those areas?
I've told this story many times and it still makes me laugh to think about that very first puzzle piece being meditation. As I got, on the road to getting back on my feet, I jumped into talk therapy. And during a session, it was brought up the idea of meditation for sleep. And I looked at her and I laughed. I was like, that is stupid. I'm not going to shave my head. I'm not going to sit here and go, and whatnot. And I got off that call and I went out back and just happened to pick up my crossbow. And I'm sitting there shooting and I'm thinking, man, I'm focused on my breathing. I am slowing my thought process. I'm meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put it in the concept of I'm standing up in a tree stand or sitting in a ground blind as still as I can waiting for a deer. Dude, I'm meditating.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff really, really works. And it changed the whole process and it really changed the whole trajectory of my journey.
Right, because I always thought of meditation too as those Zen monks that sit there all day, and I was like, I can never do that, but I learned to be present, to be fully here, and that's what you're really doing when you're in a tree stand or wherever you may be. You're learning to be fully present, fully here, observing the environment. That is meditation.
It is. And when I thought about it in that concept, it was a matter of, hey, let me go sit down somewhere, take that bow out of my hand, and just see what happens. And as I did that, and I started to get in tune and I started to read more philosophy and, adventure and start to look at things, it made me realize that there is such a vast world around us. There's so many different things we can add to the vocabulary of our self talk that it progressed into seeing what else I could do. Because, at that point in my life, the whole disaster, we'll call it, led me to a point where I was so out of whack. The simple things like after a day at work, I couldn't go through a drive-through and decide what to eat. So there'd be days that I couldn't even eat, that I didn't even eat, just because I
Mm.
couldn't make a decision. And I think about one of the first epic moments that I made on that initial pilgrimage was actually committing to myself and throwing my boat in the back of my truck, getting to the boat launch, and heading out on the water and saying, man, that was a success because I committed to something. I made a decision and I did it. And I did it in the context of my safe space. And then, you take those little steps that you do in your safe space and you start applying to the concrete world, you start to get that confidence. You start to build that trust within yourself. And this is the kind of practices that I love to share with people.
Right. So when you're outdoors, you're really learning to trust yourself because there's no one else to rely on out there. You're probably by yourself most of the time, so it's fully reliant on yourself to be present, to be aware of what's going on. I imagine when you're in the outdoor, you're constantly here in the here now. You're always present because you don't want anything
Yes,
coming up on you. You have to be fully here.
yes. And that really started to peak because I've got this natural love of like history and whatnot. And one thing that I've always done is when I'm sitting out there, I'm thinking, I wonder who throughout the course of time might have traveled down that path or, walked or sat in the same area that I'm in right now. And it started to intrigue me more and more as I started to really discover myself and look for ideas and inspiration to continue to go forward. And that brought this whole new sense of connection with the wilderness because as I sat out there and I thought about that, and then I'd watch, the wind blow the trees, or I'd watch a squirrel run by. I'd think about the fact that, you know, they've got this connection in their natural place in the order of things in nature. There's no story around that. I'm the one sitting here saying, hey, that squirrel's going to get that nut because he's got to eat and he's going to store it away for the wintertime. He's not doing that. He's not saying, hey, if I don't store this nut right here, right this moment, when it's snowing, I'm not going to be able to eat. If he hadn't stored that nut, he'll go off and find something else. And that really piqued my interest because I started to build this connection. And I can tell you a story. Actually, it was a very interesting kind of hunting season because my divorce was finalized the day of, or actually the day after opening day. And a friend of mine had just got some land, said, hey, come out and hunt. And I was like, all right, I took the day off work for the divorce hearing. Let me show up and hunt. And by the time I got there, I was really aggravated. And just so happened, I got out of my truck and I noticed there was a deer probably about 75 yards out. And this is a vast, wide open field. And being that I was so angry and caught up in my story at the moment, I made the rookie mistake of not looking around. I thought to myself, it's going to be a quick hunt and go put this deer down, and I'm going to go back and mope and do my thing. And, we'll call it a win. Well, I got about 20 yards out, and another deer caught me that I should have seen. And because I wasn't paying attention, spooked everybody off. And it made me think a little bit more about that connection because that deer, and I've never named a doe before this, but I ended up naming her NYX, the idea of new beginnings, because she played such a pivotal role in that season. But it was that story and that connection that really intrigued me and started building all these different narratives that I started really plotting my course off of.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So it's really interesting how we get into these stories, these narratives that take us out of this moment. Like you said, you weren't really in this moment. You're angry coming off the truck. You weren't really here. You were wrapped up in your story and you missed an opportunity because of that. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. They're so wrapped up in their story, their narrative, they're missing something right in front of them that could lead them to the right course of action, if you will.
I love the way that you put that, and it's actually kind of ironic because I was working earlier on a new piece that revolves around Marcus Aurelius' quote that's been pivotal for me. Is this idea of how, regardless of where a man lives, he can live well. You know, obviously, Marcus Aurelius, being the emperor of Rome at the time, was living in a palace, so it makes it sound a little bit nicer. However, the same context applies to you and I, no matter where we're at in our experience in life. We can experience that well, we can enjoy it by just fostering that sense of gratitude, that
Hmm.
sense of being present and looking at the smaller aspects around us and not diving our attention so much on the things that we want to chase that we feel we deserve.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, we're chasing the narrative to the story. We're chase, chase, chase. That's what I like too about being outdoors. If you're really in the backwoods enough, you're not having cell phone connection. You're not having that ding from your phone. You're forced to be there, especially if you're really out in the back country, like if you're in Alaska. You got all sorts of predators around, and you really need to be on top of your game. So, we have to be really mindful of being here. And I really like Marcus Aurelius too. He was really a profound philosopher for his time. If you ever read Meditations, his book, and the things he talks about.
That was the book that changed my life.
Meditations.
Yes. I can't count the number of times that I've read that book, and it's with me all the time. I'm probably on my third or fourth different copy of it because I throw it in the backpack. I take it with me no matter where I go. But it is, I mean, it's thought, not only is it thought provoking in the way that, here he is in his time, the way that he writes is still relevant
Hmm.
to how we live and how we talk and everything else nowadays, that we can actually look at it and say, hey, that makes sense. That gives me a new perspective that I can start to drum around and I can kick these ideas around. And We build our own ideas, get out in the world, whether it's in the, in the woods, on the river, in the concrete world, whatever it is, and we got to put them to the test.
Right, right. You put them to the test because that's the thing with true wisdom. It is timeless. It's always applies regardless of the situation. We can always take what somebody was going through at that time and apply it to our situation. So is this what you do when you find clients, if you will, that are like outdoorsmen, somebody else in the woods with you that's going through a tough time, something if you're partnering up and you're both sitting in a tree stand together and they're starting to go through their narrative, their story, do you impart some wisdom to get them onto a different path, a different course, as opposed to getting wrapped up in the story, making it stronger and having it fester?
I do. That's kind of the thing about this. Like we started out with the theory that you don't necessarily plan where you end up, and when you get there, it's almost as if the cup is full and spilling over, and you want to start sharing that with people. And I had gotten a sponsorship with a hunting-based community. Part of the requirement was to have a social media presence. And to me, everybody does great how-tos or, look at the journey I just had, look at what I got and this and that. But coming from where I was at, nobody in the outdoor community addresses mental health.
Mm,
And I feel like, had I, because I suffered a lot of that, especially that night in silence alone. Had I had the ability to reach out to somebody that may have understood, may not have understood, whatever, it could have been drastically different. And I wanted to make that my mission that I got behind. So as I walked my journey, as I discovered, I launched Project Mindfully Outdoors in that theory and in that idea. And it's not only caught on within the outdoor community, but it's also caught on in the concrete world. So I'm kind of pulling people left and right, different directions, taking people that never been in the woods to show them the ropes and help them explore as well. And, likewise, and I've shared with you before, as we first set this up, that story about a longtime listener who had wanted to get out in the woods and, experience a duck hunt. Now, I didn't know that they had listened to the show for one. They reached out and said, "Hey, where can I go?" I just happened to had nothing to do that weekend. So I said, let's do one better. I'll take you out. And we met up, set up, and as we're sitting there in the duck blind, this conversation starts flowing about, hey, I've got this extreme alcohol problem and it's kind of masking the suicide attempt effort that I'm trying to avoid. And, I know you've been there, so can you help me along? And I'll tell you, it's been a monumental journey, and it's something that I celebrate, the fact that I've been able to help this person along their path to recovery and putting all these things behind them.
right, that's really important. So you really made impact on him, and plus too, for all the hunters or outdoor people that don't like meditation, that had that same philosophy that I'm not a Zen monk, I can't sit there. You can teach them like if you're in a tree stand, you're meditating.
It is. And, it's funny because we go out there for the isolation of it. A lot of us get out there and we're alone and we've got this time, but we're scared of ourselves. We're scared of our thoughts. I know I was guilty of avoiding that at all costs. And as you start to explore that stuff in a safer space, it's amazing the things that, when you're sitting driving home from work, you're like, man, I don't want to think about that or whatever, because it scares me what might come up. When you're in that safer space and you've built this practice, those things don't sound as scary. The story around it changes.
Do you teach people to how to change a narrative? They're sitting in the tree stand all day and they're just rehashing the same story over and over again. Do you have a way to help them to like take away the power, if you will, from that story, or how they can be more mindful to pick it apart, if you will? Why am I taking this as my truth?
I do. And, we can kind of take it away from the hunting aspect and take it into really any concept of going in the outdoors. There's a Toltec teaching about, the human suffering story, where basically, we're writing our own narratives and this and that. We carry these things. However, we're not meant to carry them. So being able to release them is a very important part of going forward and, well-being and wellness. And I have found that being able to physically see that is really helpful. So whenever I take people out on a hike, whether it be at the beginning or at the end of the hike, what I like to do is we kind of gather around a little patch of grass, and we'll all reach down, pull up the grass quietly, and whether you close your eyes or you look at it, whatever the case may be, you just kind of hold it there for a few minutes, and you almost feel this energy coming out of you. And at the end of it, you release it, you put it back down on the ground, in a way of saying, I'm taken from nature, but I'm giving back. And in the end, you're returning all those negative things that you're carrying back to nature. You're
Mm,
releasing yourself.
that's very good. You know, just complete that cycle. So that's an interesting practice. Yeah,
Right.
I heard of that too, but some people use it as a chair. You know, you're sitting in this old chair with all this story. You just leave the baggage at that chair as you get up and you move to a different chair.
Yeah. The same concept. I mean, we go through life, and regardless of what the experiences are, we just throw in the backpack. We don't think about it. And then they start to add up and we start to feel the effects. So if you're able to release these things as you go and realize, in fact, there's a lot of Seneca writings about it that have come down. The fact that a moment once lived is no longer yours. You're basically handing it over to death. So if that's the concept and that's the theory, why are you carrying it?
Yeah, the theory I heard before was I forget who said this quote before. You're basically carrying dead bodies around instead of backpack. Call it dead bodies.
Yes.
All these old stories that you're just carrying around. It's dead weight. It doesn't serve you. And I think it'd be really liberating when you're outside if you can, you're in that tree stand or wherever you may be, and you're just isolated and you're just going through what happened in the past week or whatever, and you can just find a way to just release that back into nature as you're just sitting there being present, being more aware.
It's a very powerful thing. And, a lot of people kind of, I don't necessarily want to say look down at it, but don't understand it. And I feel like a lot of the stigma around it is the same thing about, battling mental health. We're scared of it.
Yeah, that's another word that too that creates a lot of stigma to battle or fighting. That just really makes it sticky as well. That you're not really battling, you're not fighting it. It's just part of life, and this is how we drop the weight, if you will, off our back. That we have this story that's not serving us. So if we're talking about these outdoor skills, what other outdoor skills you think are helpful into the real world that we don't even think about, like standing someplace in isolation for a while? Is there any other kind of practices, maybe like chopping wood or creating a fire, or some kind of other skill that you can also make into, I guess you can quote as like a spiritual practice? Well, when you're building a fire, when you're doing this can also translate into something else.
Well, I love the fire analogy a lot. It's one that I tend to express and share a lot of, is the concept that, nowadays it's, let's grab some ignition source, be it gas or lighter fluid, whatever, throw a match on it, and we're good to go. However, you're missing that personal connection with that fire. You're forgetting about the ability to actually gather all these things and ignite them with, say, a fire starter. You get your fire bundle together, and you're actually giving birth to it as you're
Hmm.
building your spark, and you get the tinder bundle to begin to ignite. You're actually connecting, and it's building this connection with nature that I feel strengthens the internal aspect of us. It further expands really the capacity of our soul.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. It's another way of just connecting. I think a lot of people are missing that connection, especially in today's society with this phones and beeps. It's great when you're in a back country, you have none of that.
I think it really also signifies one of the most important things when we get caught up in the rat race of the concrete world is we don't have this ability to slow down. That's why the idea of throwing gasoline on a pile of wood and a match came about, because it's quick, it's easy.
Hmm.
Now, if I was to grab the fire starter and, collect some stuff to build a tinder pile with and start that fire slow, it's just that. It's slow. It can be inconvenient. It makes you take the time. And to be able to convey that into a wellness journey or even self-care of any sort, it's slowing down. It's taking the time and
Hmm.
it's building these practices.
I think we start to gain the instant gratification with the invention of the microwave. I think that's really where it came from, where you can get hot water in 30 seconds as opposed to putting the pot in the pan, getting the pan out the water and sitting on fire and waiting 5 minutes for it to boil. I think that microwave really jump-started society with impatience. And
I love the marshmallow idea. The concept of, hey, if you wait, I'll give you two, but if you want it right now, you can only have one. 9 times out of 10, we're taking that one single one, and I've got teenagers, and I see it all the time, and I laugh, and it's one of those things that if we took more time to actually emphasize and teach these things, I feel like it would bring the next generation so much more stability and such a better foundation.
so are you instilling those foundations into your teenagers right now? Are you instilling them in your own family?
That's like the idea of building a house brick by brick. And it's funny because, as we just mentioned, that there is in that gap of where we started with my intro between marriage one and marriage two, I had lost touch with my daughter from marriage one,
Mm,
and that spanned for years and years and years. And I attribute that to not only the depression, the feeling of a failure, but also the fact that I grew up without a father.
mm.
So when all the other variables connected, it was kind of like, that was what I was taught, and that's what I knew growing up. So it just was natural. And as I've walked this journey of rebuilding myself and reshaping my reality, I reached out, I reconnected with her, and I've been building that relationship brick by brick because I took the time to break a cycle.
Mm.
And, as we learn these things growing up, it becomes important to actually look in the mirror and say, these practices and these things that I've learned, these habits that I have, how are they serving me? Are they serving the version of myself that I want to become? Or are they neglecting and hurting not only myself, but people that I really truly should be caring about and that I do care about? And when you look at those, when you look in the mirror and you ask yourself those kind of hard questions, it really becomes a way to not only shatter those cycles and those habits, but it becomes that magnet that you can magnetize your compass and you can find your way back north.
A lot of people aren't breaking those cycles. They just keep that divide in place, but they're not taking the time to say, we can change course here. We just, once again, it's back to the narrative. We can keep living this narrative, or we can write a new story, if you will. We can break that cycle, have a new way forward. So your daughter probably has a different impression of you now. For a while there, she didn't know who you were anymore, and you're rebuilding that back, almost like a reintroduction, like of who you are and what you stand for.
Yes, which, to think about then in comparison to now is such a drastically different person. And
Mhm.
it's been through putting in the hard work, looking in the mirror, having those hard conversations, either in the mirror or in a journal, and the willingness to expand and explore different avenues to really build the vocabulary that I use.
Yeah, I know she probably looks at you so differently. Like, I knew Dad was like this, now he's like this. What happened?
Yeah, and I mean, to go back to that day, yeah, it felt like Davy Crockett standing in the Alamo. But, you know, when you get in that position and you find yourself as an absentee parent, you want to go back, but it feels like you're standing in a gunfight, you're going to die, right? Because there's so much fear built up around how you're going to be perceived. And I remember going through that journey. And the one thing that I really, really love to emphasize is no matter what you think the big picture is, whether it's a reconnection or it's moving forward in your life where you're trying to go, it's all about one simple thing. And that's delivering and utilizing an authentic message and an authentic version of yourself. And when you implement those two little things, all the other variables that you have no control over don't seem so scary because they fall directly into place where they're prescribed to become.
But now it's the authentic you, where before you're probably in your narrative, in your story, and you wrote a different story, a different narrative to be the authentic you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think back because there was attempts before, half-hearted. It was kind of like showing up and saying, "Hey, here I am," as opposed to the day that it truly happened. And yes, being scared out of my mind that I was going to be stabbed and thrown in the river, considering where we were at. However, it was about delivering that direct message. It was about presenting authentically what it was.
And now are you helping other outdoorsmen, if you will, outdoors women, be their authentic self, as opposed to being caught up in this narrative, this story that things can change, you can change your life around? Do you use yourself like as an example of how change can happen?
Well, everything that I write and all the work that I do is directly derived from my story, from my journey, and the things that I still learn even up to today. And what's cool is it's not just the outdoor community. It's caught on, and there's people from every aspect. And I welcome everybody to the Camp of Healing. It's exactly what it is. It's let's heal and let's go forward and let's become a community. And that's what
Mhm.
I've emphasized.
You're working on a book right now. So what's your book about? Is that basically your life story and your journey, and how you rewrote your story to be the authentic you?
Actually, the book is kind of it's actually about one of the most important things that I've done with my life, which I shared about reconnecting with my daughter and the process that it took for me to get there. And the reason that I did that was because, a couple weeks after the initial introduction, we had gone to dinner, just her and I, the first time together. And afterward, ran around town. And, after I dropped her off, I was thinking about it. I was like, man, not only did I rob her, but I robbed myself of all those years and all those experiences. There needs to be a blueprint out there, an inspiration, a spark.
Mhm.
And if I put that out there and somebody read that and did the same thing, can you imagine one person at a time and how different things could become and how much more value to their life and to that child's life? And that was what put it all together. And then as I was going through it and writing it, I thought about it a little bit more. Yeah, that's the story that drives the book. However, there's so much within there that you can apply to every facet of your life. So it's kind of a very well-rounded version of here's the most important aspect that drives the book, but there's all these different things that you can get out of it.
'Cause, yeah, it can apply to, I'm sure a lot of people are facing that, maybe feelings of abandonment too. Like when you weren't around, maybe she felt abandoned at times. Like, where did he go? He just disappeared from my life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are looking to build that bridge and they don't know how. So maybe that book will provide them some guidance on how to rebuild the bridge, those memories, that feeling of abandonment that I didn't measure up as a parent.
That's exactly what I felt leading up to it. And then I did it, and here I am further down the road, got this great relationship building and still blossoming. And just the way that it feels is something that I implore for other people to experience.
I think you're just teaching a lot of people out there they're not even aware of that might catch you in a podcast, might catch a little bit of your book. And that's what we just do. We just keep sharing our story that we can be that flame, that spark for another to light them onto their path, their way.
That's all we can really strive to do. And that's been the message behind Project Mindfully Outdoors and everything else that I put out in the world is let's take this, all these different forms of media and let's use them for something good.
Right, to lead to that. So how would people get in touch with you if that something you said resonated with them and they want to reach out and have a further conversation with you? Maybe go on a duck hunt.
Well, I'm based in Michigan, and you know what? I'm more than happy to hit the field, be it hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, whatever, with anybody that is interested. So that is an open invitation to all your listeners. Now, to reach me directly, you can swing over to projectmindfullyoutdoors.co, or you can email me at Mike Martin at projectmindfullyoutdoors.co, or find us on Facebook, Instagram, all the different social media platforms. And there's a podcast out there that is obviously called Project Mindfully Outdoors.
All right, great. So I'll put all that stuff in the show notes so they have all that for them. So if you give anyone some kind of like parting words about your life story or how they can move forward in their life, what would you say to them if they're feeling a place where they're feeling really depressed, really anxious? What can they do right now that you would really, give them encouragement to move forward?
But I'm going to go with in fact, this Marcus Aurelius quote that he takes from Heracles is actually something I've written in my truck that I look at every day, is this idea that you never step in the same river twice. So a lot of us go through the hamster wheel and we get stuck. We feel like we're not going anywhere and anything. We're looking at the same exact thing day in and day out. And when you stop and you look at it through that lens, just like when I walk out and I hit the riverbanks of the Huron River, yeah, maybe fish in the same spot. However, there's always something different that comes along, be it I catch a different fish, or, maybe a herring flies by, whatever the case may be. There's always something different. And the same holds true in our concrete day-to-day lives. There is something different that happens, no matter how many times you feel like you're looking at the same wall. There's something on that wall that you can look at and take as your momentum. You can find a new word to add to your vocabulary. And if you start to focus on that vocabulary and redefine your self-talk, man, the path that you're going to walk is truly monumental, because a lot of the time we get stuck and we say, we can't climb that mountain because we didn't bring the climbing gear. And the truth is, it was never about that rope. It was about the drive. And when you take the second to reignite that tinder bundle that is the drive within, life is limitless.
All right, Mike, it was a real pleasure to have you on today.
Well, Sam, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to celebrate my work and my journey. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wellness Wednesdays with Sam the Miracle Man, and we hope you'll continue to discover the power of resilience and the steps we can all take to create our own miracles while on our bumpy path to well-being. But just remember, be present, find clarity, and also subscribe so we can all continue to share this life-changing journey together. see you next Wednesday.